So today's guest is Benjamin Ko from Singapore, and I'm glad to have him on the show, especially because I have never met any dancer from Singapore before. I've actually been in Singapore, but I've never danced there, and that's a long time ago. And yes, I'm very excited to hear more about a person like Benjamin, who, well, not only lives in Singapore, but he also has a lot of international experience with tango. So that's yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
So can you give us a short introduction for people who don't know you, about who you are?
Okay. Well, professionally, I live in Singapore. I was born here, and professionally, I work as a fund manager, meaning that my clients put money into the fund, and I use the money in the fund to buy shares. So on the stock market. So for example, I might own a company like Microsoft, or Sony, or Samsung Electronics, or Rolls-Royce, or whatever it is. Basically, yeah. And for tango, well, I've been dancing tango a long time. This year will be 24 years. Yeah, I just passed 24 years in tango. Yeah.
Oh,
So I mostly I dance. I occasionally DJ, and I taught a little bit, but that was more than 10 years ago. I've not taught for a long time. Yeah.
okay. Well, that's an interesting parallel with my last guest, actually, Ricardo Paxoto from England, who also yes, taught in the past, but that's a long time ago. So is there like a reason why you stopped teaching?
Well, when I taught, it was mostly when people asked me to teach them. And there was one time I filled in as the substitute teacher because the teacher had gone to Argentina for his usual annual pilgrimage or professional development, I guess, right? So I filled in and took over his classes for a while, and that was for about 3 months. And then the rest of the time when I taught, sometimes I would assist other teachers who needed a partner for their classes. And then other times there were students, people who approached me and asked me to give them private classes because, I guess they liked the way I was dancing and they liked the way I thought about tango. So that was that. Yeah, but more recently, I just dance. And since there are other teachers who teach, I guess they do a good enough job. So, for the other people interested in learning, they take classes with them or they go to practice. And occasionally at Practica, I may see someone who needs help and ask if they want any ideas, and then I can give them some tips. But mostly, I do my own practice and I just do my own dancing.
Okay, so it's not really your specialty, right?
No, I love dancing, but I'm first and foremost a dancer. I guess a dancer who can DJ and a dancer who can teach, not the other way around.
Yes. But you're also a DJ, right? So
Yes,
that's also
that's
one
right.
of your strong points, right?
I've been DJing a long time, but of course there are other DJs now in Singapore, so I don't DJ all that often. Maybe no, I get asked to DJ, but sometimes I'm busy, so it doesn't work. Yeah, but when I started, of course, in Singapore, I learned to dance overseas, right? At my university, there was a tango club, so I took lessons there. And then when I came back to Singapore after graduation, there was a small group of people who were dancing. And I started DJing because I didn't like the music that the organizer was playing. So I volunteered to DJ essentially. And that's how I got into DJing, because for me, the music is the most important thing. I tried other dances as well. And I always came back to tango because of the music.
The
So
cat
for me,
is back.
yes, that's Zoe. Well, she's not disruptive, so I guess we'll leave her. Yeah, but anyway, so I got into DJing simply because I didn't like the music that the organizer was playing. So I volunteered to DJ. He said, okay, so that's how I got into it, right? And then of course I had to learn along the way. Luckily, there were resources online, where other DJs talked about experiences or guidelines on how to build tandas, for example. So that was very helpful. And of course, music. There were some example tandas, and so I learned, okay, this is how you construct tanda. And of course, you had to just buy more music. So of course, I started buying. Back then, it was CDs, right? Now you can buy music digitally, but back then, you just had to find the CDs and buy them. So that's what I did. So I was ordering a lot of CDs from Argentina at one point.
Sorry, I have to giggle because of the cat.
Oh yeah,
She's gone now.
yeah, she's going out. Yeah.
So I'll ask you again about those details later about the history. So first and foremost, you're a dancer. That's what you would identify yourself as.
Yes, yes. I mean, in fact, I just came back from Vietnam in Ho Chi Minh City. They had a workshop with a visiting teacher, and I was the DJ at one of the milongas.
Oh, nice,
Yeah.
nice,
Yeah.
nice, nice. So I think you already said a little bit about it, but let's just focus on the origins of your tango life.
Right, right. So I, of course, did not set out to dance tango initially. I just was interested in dancing because, well, before I went to university, I was watching some movies at home from my brother's Laserdisc collection. And one of these movies I watched was True Lies. So it's a movie that stars Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tia Carrere and Jamie Lee Curtis. And it opens with basically it's a story about, spies essentially. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, he plays a spy and he meets an enemy spy very early in the movie and he's dancing with her and dances a tango. I didn't know that at that time, of course. I just thought, okay, it's cool. I should learn to dance. So when I went to university, there was a Department of Drama and Dance. And I thought, okay, let's sign up for classes. But it turned out that the class I signed up for was extremely popular. And so there was actually no space. So I thought I would just have to wait until the next, quarter to sign up for classes. And then one of my friends in the hostel came by and said, hey, there's dance classes up on the hill, tango classes. So, we push our bikes up the hill. And in this converted container, someone's giving tango classes. It turns out that the university had a tango club separate from the Department of Drama and Dance. The tango club was run by students, right? But they invited teachers from the community to come and teach. And so I took classes, those tango classes, and they were a lot of fun. So I just carried on. And so I just basically just kept taking the classes. Eventually, I was helping to run the club as well. So that's how I got into it. And then, my second year, I bought a car and started going off campus to milongas off campus.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you?
Yes.
This was abroad.
Yes, this was abroad. Yeah,
Okay,
this was
in
in
which
my
country?
university. It was in the US.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to
okay.
Stanford University in the US. So this is in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So today, San Francisco is still one of the more active places for tango in the US. In the US, probably you've got New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco Bay Area, and probably a couple other places. But these are the more well-known ones. So in San Francisco, even back then, more than 20 years ago, there was a decent amount, there was quite a lot of tango. So in my second year, when I got a car, I started going off campus to the local neighborhood milongas and of course, driving to San Francisco itself to dance. Yeah. So I had a really good time. Yeah. But it meant that, of course, most of my social life, I was actually dancing tango rather than going to parties, so I guess a lot of my friends were actually not university friends. They were, other dancers in the local community.
But that's great because you, sorry, take some water. That's great because you actually came across tango in a very beneficial environment.
Yeah, it was a university environment.
No, but I mean in general, like in San Francisco. So you.
Oh,
you
yes,
were,
yes, yeah. Yes. That's true. That's true. I was very fortunate to start tango in in an area where there was a lot of tango. It was very vibrant. There were regular milongas, lots of dancers. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it definitely helped me, advance quickly, right? Because there were a lot of dancers, and you had to get good, otherwise you don't get to dance essentially. So on campus, everyone's learning, lots of beginners, so everyone's fine. But once you go into the neighborhood milonga, or the city itself, right, everyone's there to dance. No one's there to quote unquote help you, right? Because it's a milonga, not a practica or a lesson. So if you're no good, you don't get to dance, or you might get, the first dance, people figure out they can't dance, and then you sit the rest of the night. Yeah, and of course, for leaders, of course, you overcome shyness, right? I'm actually quite a shy person, but with tango, you have no choice, because if you're shy, you look at the floor, you don't get to dance. You have to look at women. You have to invite somebody. You have to invite the followers, right? So I guess for some of the followers, if you're shy, maybe some guy was to come and ask you to dance. But for the leaders, if you're shy, too bad, right? You just sit the rest of the night or watch other people dance. So that was, in a way, key for me to overcome my shyness. Tango helped me become less shy as a person.
But do you mean like, was that already cabeceo, or was it just verbal asking? Because this is a
No, it
long
was
time
Cabaseo
ago.
right from the start.
Oh,
It
right
was
from the start. Okay.
Cabaseo. Yeah, yeah. I think maybe only in the practicas, you can ask people if you want,
Yeah.
but in the milongas, very, very quickly. I don't even remember. I don't ever remember asking somebody. Like
Okay.
even when it was my first local milonga, it was clear already that you had to invite by Cabaseo. So I did, and that was fine.
And what year was that?
This was 1998 when I started tango, and I started going to the local milongas with a car in 1999. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
But that's actually I'm actually surprised how normal cabeceo was back then in that area.
As far as I know, it's always been that way. Of course, back then, I think there would still be some people who would come out and ask, but I think it was already very normal to invite by Cabaseo. At least because back then there were also these Tango email lists, right? Today they're not active anymore, but back then there was Tango-L for a list, which was a discussion about topics related to Tango, and it was very active because back then there was no Facebook, right? So people were discussing over email various topics. And then there was Tango-A, which was for announcements, where people would announce Tango events in various regions, right? So it's actually sorted globally by like, Europe or North America East, North America West, or Asia, and so on. And today, of course, they don't exist. You would actually just go on Facebook or Google and look for some Facebook group related to that area. But back then, Tango-A and Tango-L were the key Tango resources. And it was on Tango-L that, I also learned about, common practice, what to do,
Yeah.
what the usual habits are in a milonga, for example. Yeah.
So were you the kind of guy who immediately wanted to know about all these things?
I didn't ask very much on Tango-L. I was mostly reading.
Yeah, but
what
I
people
mean,
were writing and reading.
I mean, like, were you the kind of guy who went and investigated this type of material pretty quickly after beginning?
I guess I'm just curious by nature. So,
Okay.
once I found out about Tango-L, I just subscribed to it and then I just read it as it came along. And I found it fascinating because, it's a subculture, obviously, with its
Yeah.
own, codes of behavior and attitudes, and I thought that was fascinating. And of course, digging back further, I think one of the projects I did was about Tango history, right? So digging, of course, I couldn't read Spanish back then, so I was just reliant on what people who wrote in English about what they had read or what they had read in Spanish. But learning about the history of Buenos Aires itself as a port city, the origins of tango, right? Essentially, as a dance between gay men, for example, that was really interesting. Or actually, it was a dance between men, some of whom were gay,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's
But
far correct. Yeah.
yeah, so that's more accurate. Yeah, so that was really interesting to me. And then looking at attitudes back then. I mean, in 1998, in the early 2000s, where there were people who would deny it, right, and say, okay, no, gay people have no place in tango, and so on.
Oh,
And that was kind of funny, because if you understood the history of it, you knew that actually, it was a dance, between both straight people and gay people, and it was a street dance, so to speak, right? It didn't become something for like, elites or high society until much later. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So how was it like well, how was your first class? How was it like? Like the feeling of was it an Argentine tango class immediately?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the first tango class, the first dance class ever for me was an Argentine tango class.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the teacher was from the city, from San Francisco area,
Hmm.
and well, his assistant was another student who was a dance student who was a master student in the dance department, and actually she later became a full-time tango teacher. Yeah, Chelsea Ng and Gary Weinberg. So haven't seen them for a long time, but yeah, I still try to keep in touch with them. I was just in the US about 2 months ago, and I tried to meet up with my tango friends as well. Yeah, so I saw Chelsea was not around, but I saw Nora Dinzel Barker, who organizes Nora's Tango Week. So she's been a fixture in the San Francisco area for about 20 years. Yeah, so she was after Gary and Chelsea, she was the other teacher that was teaching at the Tango Club. So she was also one of my first teachers. Yeah. So it was interesting because, well, it was just something I'd never done before, right? But just the idea of being able to dance. So that was cool. And for whatever reason, it resonated with me. I mean, obviously there were challenges, but they seemed surmountable. So it was okay. I think I made good enough progress that I kept going. Yeah. And of course, for me, a big part of the dance is, after I finish the dance with my partner and she's got a smile on her face. So that's great, positive reinforcement. So it tells me that, okay, I did something good. I made someone happy and that makes me happy. So it's good.
Yes, yes, yes. And yeah, so how did you already talked about discovering the music a bit through CDs and so, but maybe also through these email lists. So how did you or maybe I should ask it like this first, like were you immediately interested in the music as well? Because some people start and they're only interested in the dance, but some others
Right. Well, for me, I got a music CD quite early on because I remember after one of Nora's sessions, I think I can't remember what happened, but there were three of us, students in the class who decided, well, let's go buy some music, right? So Nora was selling CDs out of the boot of a car. So we each bought one CD each. I remember I got a D'Arienzo CD, right? El Rey de Compas on El Bandoneon. I don't have it here today with me actually, but it will still be fun. But it's got a red cover. So if you look it up online, you can probably find that cover. And another friend got a Disali disc. I can't remember what the third guy got. Yeah, but so I, in my spare time, I didn't know anything else, right? And of course, YouTube didn't really exist back then, so you couldn't just find music that way. And I know people were using Napster back then, but it was mostly pop music, right? You couldn't expect to find Argentine tango music on Napster.
No.
So basically, when I wanted to listen to tango music, I would just play my D'Arienzo CD. So I got to know D'Arienzo quite well. Luckily, it was, I think as CD collections go, it's quite a decent compilation, even though it's only 20 songs, but it was a good overview of, D'Arienzo's best years, right? With Ichagüe and then some of his early instrumentals as well. So that was what I knew about music, D'Arienzo. And of course, during the practica, people would play, because the Tango Club also ran a practica once a week. So I would go to the practica and dance and practice, of course, but I had no idea what people were playing, and it was only, like I said, when I came back to Singapore and then I realized that I didn't like the music that the organizer was playing. And then I decided, well, I have to learn more about the music because I know enough to know I don't like this, but what else do I like? And so I started going online and I visited, for example, Michael Avoca's website, where he reviewed a whole bunch of CDs. He used to run, I think, a subscription club where you pay a subscription fee and he would mail you a CD every month, right?
Yeah.
But apart from that, he also had reviews of many CDs, and that was invaluable to me when I started building my CD collection because he was giving, basically he was reviewing all the CDs that were being published at that time on the El Bandoneon label and also Reliquias by EMI, right? So that was actually really helpful when I was building on my CD collection. I think probably more than half of the CDs I bought were based on recommendations that Michael Avoca made on his website. So this was really, really helpful. Yeah. And of course, initially when I was starting out, I was just trying to buy, different orchestras, right? And then later I learned, oh, okay, even the same orchestra, when they've got a different singer, a different period, right? The songs are totally different. I remember when I had Disali, for example, I think the first few Disalis I bought, it was Disali Rufino, if I remember correctly. And then there was an instrumental one, I think in the 50s, right? And then for a long time, I didn't buy any other Disali songs because I thought, well, I've got, 3 CDs of Disali or something like that, and there was plenty. And then much later, I got a CD of Disali with Podesta. I was like, oh wow, this guy's like fantastic, right? And then I understood, okay, look, there's just so much more. And then it's like going down the rabbit hole, right? Because then you start collecting stuff, and I think a lot of DJs go down that rabbit hole. We end up with 5, 10,000, 20,000 songs, of which probably we play only 1 or 2% of them in any given milonga, right? Simply because a lot of the songs, they're good, but they're better ones, right? And as a DJ, I think the aim is to play the best song for that situation, right? So you might have 10 songs that would all work, but you try to find the best, I guess, 4 songs in that situation for a tanda. Yeah.
Yes.
So I've got, like any DJ, plenty of music that sounds great, but may not be wonderful to dance to, and some that's really good and good to dance to. But then, in the milonga, you look at who's on the floor, it's like, okay, maybe this song's too difficult. Let's play something else that's, just as nice, but easier to dance to so that, everyone, not just the advanced dancers, everyone can come out to play.
Yes. So how was the comparison between like San Francisco, the level of tango level in San Francisco, and when you got back to Singapore?
Oh, well, it's not really a fair comparison, right? Because when I was in the US around 2000, I think tango was probably already 10 or 20 years old at least,
Yeah.
in San Francisco. And in Singapore, when I came back, it was, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years old at most. So there were very few, actually maybe 5 years. I think 1997 was the first time anyone had did something tango related in Singapore. And by the time I was back in 2002, so maybe 5 years, but at the time, there were only a handful of people dancing, maybe 15, 20 people or something, right? This guy called Case Ong, he's basically the father of tango in Singapore. So Case at that time was organizing, these practice sessions, and we were having, I guess, sort of milongas, in bars that would have us essentially, buy a drink, get in. So I guess business wasn't that great. So they were willing to let dancers in, even though you usually buy only 1 or 2 drinks a night. But I guess if it's a slow night, it's better than nothing. So of course we never got weekends, right? Because it's the weekdays that are slow for a bar. So we were dancing basically back then. And I remember early on, we had no idea what to do with music. And so sometimes we just put in one CD and play for a whole hour,
Yeah. Yeah.
So basically have an hour of D'Arienzo, an hour of Fresedo, an hour of Di Sarli, right? And then later again, right, as I started to learn more about the concept of tandas, how you would organize the music. Then of course, with a bigger collection as well, then I started, back then burning the tandas to CD, and then bringing the CDs to a milonga and putting them in the CD player, swapping them out. That's how it went along. So I think in the space of maybe 2-3 years, I think certainly by 2005 or 2006, there were regular milonga places. There was a decent number of people coming to dance. But of course, the level only really started to climb after people started going to Buenos Aires, right? Because otherwise, if you're just where you are in the community, it's not easy to really advance, because you can be at the top of the heap, but if the pyramid is very small, then you don't climb very high.
Yes.
It was the same for me. I mean, in San Francisco, there were, it was already quite a mature scene in that sense. So I had to get good very quickly, because otherwise I just wouldn't get to dance. And then when I came back to Singapore, I had, I guess, 4 years of experience. I was considered one of the most experienced dancers, right? So for the other dancers, yeah, okay, now there's someone essentially who's more experienced. So that's in a way a benchmark. But for me, it was a challenge also, right? Because then it was hard for me to advance as a dancer. And then I started going overseas, to workshops, to festivals, taking classes with the visiting teachers. And that really helped me as well, because then it opened my horizons, right? Because the more advanced dancers, it's not just a matter of better technique, but they have a wider vocabulary. And this is some of the things that are interesting for you as a dancer, because it's like an alphabet, right? If you know only 10 letters of the alphabet, you can write them really well, but you cannot master the language until you know all the letters of the alphabet, right? And so in English, you've got 26 letters. If you know 10 of the letters, you can write really well, but you don't really have a good command of the language. You have to know all 26 letters. And it's true that not all the letters are used all of the time, right? So if you don't know how to use the letter Q or the letter Z, right, you can still get by quite well in English, at least, right? But there are times when the situation calls for a word that uses Q or Z, right? And that makes a difference between the expert dancer versus someone who's merely okay, right?
Yes. Was it frustrating to get back to Singapore in those conditions where
Well,
tango
I
wasn't
would
really
say, I guess I didn't have very high expectations, because when I left San Francisco, I wasn't an advanced dancer anyway. I think I was probably at best an intermediate level dancer, right? I'd been dancing at that time for 4 years, so probably I was at most an intermediate level dancer. It was only so when I came back, I saw other dancers who were beginners, and there were a couple of other intermediate level dancers. It was fine, in a way you don't know what you're missing, right? It was only the year late, in later years when I started traveling, I remember my first overseas tango trip was to Hong Kong. It was a workshop with Pablo and Dana. And we were just watching them perform, and that was an eye opener. And then that same year, I went to Taiwan for the Taipei Tango Festival. I think that was the second time they organized it. And there, some of the classes I took were with Javier Rodriguez and Geraldine Rojas, right? And so I was lucky that year, I had the privilege of watching them dance live, to Poema. So you can find that recording on YouTube. I have a DVD of that recording. So probably one of the best performances of Poema, you can find on YouTube, and certainly the best that I remember. And it was fantastic, and it was great inspiration. And I think for a lot of for probably an entire generation of dancers, right? The women all wanted to dance like Geraldine, or the guys that wanted to dance like Javier. They became very popular, had lots of students, a big following. So for me, it was the start of a journey, I guess. I took classes with many other teachers after that, of course. And I think I hope anyway that I learned a little bit from each of them, so that I could become the best version of me. I don't have any illusions that I can dance like any of these great masters, right? I don't have their body, I don't have their background, and I don't have that time, right? Because they are professional dancers.
Yeah,
They probably practice 6 to 8 hours a day, maybe
yeah.
more, right? And I barely get 6 to 8 hours a week, and I'm only a little bit longer, right? I'm just having fun rather than actually training. So I, I guess in the early years, I just wanted to learn more and more. And these days, I just want to be happy and dance the best that I can, right? Be the best version of me.
So traveling abroad was what mostly caused your growth at some point.
Yes, definitely. I think when you dance at home, it's with people it's comfortable, right? You see your old friends, but there's a limit, right? Because you're swimming in the same pool, essentially. You're fishing from the same pool. And so if you want to expand your horizons, you need to go to a different pool, right? That pool might be bigger, it might be smaller, but it's different, right? And when it's different, it forces you to explore the rest of your vocabulary, or to grow your vocabulary, because even at home, you'll probably have your favorite dancers, right? So you dance frequently, probably with the same, 5 or 10 people, and you know each other's habits, and that's fun sometimes, but that also can be limiting, right? So if you want to expand your horizons, try different things, then you need to travel. And if you live in a country where there's a, or you live in a city where there's a big community, it might be as simple as going to a milonga you don't usually go to, right? But in a small community, yeah, you can go to every milonga, you know everybody already. So you don't have that luxury, I suppose. Yeah. So in a place like Buenos Aires, you have several milongas a day. You can the same likewise in New York, or in Seoul, or in Tokyo, right? Usually any day there's 2 or 3 milongas or more that you can go to. So if you want something different, it's as simple as going to a different milonga. But Singapore's community is not as big. So normally on any given day, there's 0 or 1 milonga, right? So
Yeah.
if you go to every milonga for 2 weeks, you'll probably see everybody. Yeah.
So I don't understand. So Singapore is not that big. That's what you said.
We have probably maximum 100 dancers,
Okay.
including the irregulars. Yeah. So if you count typical milonga, well, COVID's a bit changed things a little bit, right? But before COVID, typical milonga attendance was probably around 40 people, right? Yeah, and I think the peak was probably 80, depending on the kind of event, for example. Yeah. So now with COVID, after COVID, the crowds are coming back, but the milongas are still not the same size. Yeah.
Yes, that's logical. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, that's kind of strange, right? That tango in Seoul or Tokyo is so much bigger, whereas
Tokyo's the largest city, right? I mean,
yeah,
you've got
that's true. But yeah,
30, 40 million people in the greater area, and
yeah.
probably 10 million itself in the core of Tokyo. And Singapore, the whole country has like, 6 million people or so,
Okay,
right?
okay. Yeah, I guess that's maybe smaller than I expected, but still, like it's kind of strange, right? Right, like in cities like Berlin, there's much more tango than in Singapore, then, but it's kind of random as well
Well,
sometimes.
Berlin's tango scene is also much older, right? Because it
Yeah,
goes back to, I think, the 1920s, when, tango first appeared in Western Europe, right? So you've got almost 100 years of tango in Berlin, in Europe, certainly. And in Western Europe, it's quite easy to travel because you can hop on a train. So if you live in Munich and you want to go to Berlin for the weekend, you can take a train or you take a short flight. And even from Berlin, there are cities within maybe an hour's drive, right? So you've got access to different cities, different communities. And in Singapore, for better or worse, it's an island, which means people who live nearby, still have to fly, right?
yeah,
So you can live in, in Europe, if the distance is under 500 kilometers. You can just hop on a train and 2 or 3 hours you get there, right? But in Singapore, 500 kilometers, all of these are different countries. They have to get on a plane, right? That means someone in Jakarta has to get on a plane, someone in Ho Chi Minh City, Bangkok, Hanoi, Kuala Lumpur, they all have to get on a plane. And
Yeah.
I think one of the big differences also is that in Western Europe, the level of income is quite similar.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
not
yeah.
a
That's what I just
huge
thought.
difference,
Yeah,
right? Whereas
yeah,
in Singapore, fortunately, it's prosperous, but it also means that we are much more expensive compared to our neighbors. And
yes,
so while someone in Singapore might be able to just go to Kuala Lumpur for the weekend, the reverse is not necessarily true,
yeah,
right? For us, the air ticket is comparatively affordable, right? We can just go to Hanoi for the weekend, come back, and then 2 weeks later we go to Kuala Lumpur. 2 more weeks we go to Penang. 2 more weeks we go to Jakarta. We can travel, almost every week if we want to, because for us, going to these places to Southeast Asia is very affordable. But the reverse is not true, because if you look at the average income levels in Vietnam or Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia, it's actually a big difference. It's much lower than Singapore. So that means that these people who live there, who might want to come to Singapore for tango, is very expensive. And so we might see them maybe once or twice a year. Like if we have a marathon or festival, then they might make the effort to come, but they can't come every week. It doesn't work. It's too expensive. Whereas in Western Europe, for example, right? If you live in Munich, you can go to Zurich for the weekend. It's okay, right?
yeah,
And if you live in London, you can hop on a plane and you'll be in Paris for the weekend. That's totally fine. The income level difference might be 50%. It's not 4 or 5 times, right? But in Singapore versus the rest of Southeast Asia, it really is a big gap. And so I think that's made it harder, because that means that while the dancers in Singapore can travel to Malaysia if they want to dance, or to Vietnam or to Indonesia, the reverse is not necessarily true.
yes, yes. So is there like so you came back in 2002
Yep.
in Singapore, and then you said that around 2005, 2006, there were more people dancing. So what has been the evolution in the rest of these years until now for tango in Singapore?
Well, I think Singapore tango, I think, is very similar to tango elsewhere in other cities. It's just a matter of whether things happen more quickly or more slowly, right? Because initially when you start, everyone's a beginner, and then you just have practices, and then you maybe have one milonga a month or something, and then you have, a milonga every week, and then you have milongas on the weekends, and then you have milongas every day, and then you have
Yes.
multiple milongas on the weekends, and then multiple milongas every day. So where we are at now in Singapore is that we have milongas on the weekends, and practices and occasional milongas during the week. And I think on the weekends, sometimes there are 2 milongas on the day, like maybe afternoon and evening, for example. Yeah. So it's not any different, I guess, from other places. It's just that maybe it's a little slower because we don't have the benefit of neighboring cities coming to visit us so easily. Yeah. Whereas, like I said, elsewhere around the world, if the country is big enough, you have internal travel. In the case of Europe, even though these are different countries, but the level of income is similar, there's some linguistic similarity, you can travel, right? So, especially if you live in the border, right? So if you're in Germany, but the region you live in borders the Netherlands, for example, chances are high that you will understand some Dutch, right? And so you don't mind, you can go to a Dutch milonga and you might understand half of what's being said, and that's enough because you can kabaseo and dance, and the rest of it is small talk. But in Singapore, it's tough because we can go to Vietnam, but we don't speak any. I don't speak any Vietnamese. Of course, there are some Vietnamese who speak English, right? And usually in the milonga, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
But beyond small talk, it's tougher. Uh, yeah, and I think also it's tough because tango is a comparatively expensive hobby, right? Because
Yes.
the
Absolutely.
teachers, a famous teacher is not going to give you a discount just because you come from a poor country. And likewise, when you buy tango shoes, you don't get a discount just because you come from a poor country. And so that means, relatively speaking, it's very expensive for people in a poor country to take up tango. So even though the country might have a lot of people by count, the number of people who can afford to take up tango is not very big. And so what I see from my experience is that when I travel to a country that's less well off, the people who dance are comparatively well off, you know. So
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
that's what I just thought, because that's like the opposite concentration, maybe. Like the general population is very
yeah,
poor. It's also
right,
likely in some of these countries that you have an elite who goes to universities and they can just
exactly,
afford whatever they want. So that
exactly,
kind of like, not
exactly,
not judging that situation in a political sense, but it does nurture maybe the existence of tango, because
right,
they're from such a different culture, and yet they can go to Buenos
right,
Aires or wherever because they have the
exactly.
money.
Right. So an example would be, for example, a couple of years ago, I was in Zurich, for example, and I asked a friend, right, what does a supermarket cashier earn in Zurich, right? And he said, well, it's about 48,000 francs, right? And I can't remember the exchange rate now, but 1 franc to €1 is something around that, might be 20% plus or minus, right? But 48,000 francs or 48,000 euros a year, right? That's 4,000 euros. And if the tango shoes are 100 euros, you can afford it, right?
Yeah.
Contrast this with a place like Vietnam, right, where the average wage is a couple of $100 a month, right, US dollars. You're asking someone to spend a week's wages on a pair of shoes. That's expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go to a place like Vietnam, there are dancers there, but they are much better off, right? They are going to be business owners, right?
Yeah.
Or they have a job, a senior job, right, in a company that pays very well, right? Likewise in Indonesia, likewise in Malaysia, for example, right? The dancers who can do it, afford it, right? Generally, they're going to be quite well off, and of course that means they're older, right? Because if you're 25 and starting out your career, you're not going to spend half your wages on shoes and tango lessons. Yeah. So it's a different demographic. Yeah.
But then do you see that the demographic in Singapore is more diverse, like more sociologically broad?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I remember when I came back, I had just graduated, right? Fresh graduate, but I could afford to dance, right? And even then, we had some university students who were joining us, right? So clearly, university students don't have much money, but they might have some
Yeah.
savings or the allowance from their parents, and they can pay for lessons and come to dance. Uh, and even now, for example, some of the senior dancers, they are running classes for university students. Yeah, so it's affordable enough in Singapore that the university students can come for classes.
Yeah. That's an interesting um like dynamic. And then you haven't even mentioned that in Europe there are so many international events where people go all the time. Like, it's not just that you can take a train from Munich to Berlin, but it's also that there's I would say an elite of people who are constantly traveling
Oh,
to
yes.
other countries. And actually, is there something like a tango marathon or an encuentro in Southeast Asia? Are you aware of that?
Yeah, of course. I think the first, as I mentioned, there were festivals quite early on from 2003 onwards. And I can't remember when the first marathon started, but there have been marathons for at least 10 or 11 years now,
Okay.
every year. So, of course, this is prior to COVID, right? COVID's changed things, but prior to COVID, there were marathons in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Singapore for sure, in Vietnam as well. I think Malaysia also had some. So most of the Southeast Asian countries had marathons. Tokyo also had a marathon. I remember that. Seoul had a marathon. Busan had a marathon. And Shanghai had a marathon. Beijing had a marathon. So of course, China, still has COVID restrictions. So
Yeah.
whatever events they have, it's basically just domestic. You can't really travel in for a marathon. But before that, it was pretty active. And in fact, I think for China, the tango scene has continued to develop, and it'll probably be the biggest and it's the fastest growing scene in Asia for sure. And if it's not already the biggest, it will, probably within a decade be the biggest in Asia. Yeah.
So do you
Simply because they
also,
have so many
sorry.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, do you
Sorry.
also still travel to or maybe more general question. So do you travel to East Asia, for example, to dance?
Yeah, I do. I mean, before, again, a qualifier, right? With COVID, nobody was traveling. So, but before COVID, yeah, I was going to Japan, I was going to Korea, I was going to Taiwan, I was going to Hong Kong. These were my usual haunts for tango. Yeah. Because
Okay.
I have friends. I guess over time you make friends, right? Because you go somewhere first time it's new, you dance with people, you get along, you like them, you become friends, and then the next time I'm in town, you have a dinner or coffee, and then you get along, and then you just kind of see each other at different events as well. Because, like you mentioned, right, there's a group of hardcore tango dancers who tend to travel, and so sometimes you see the same person in a different event in a different place. So
Yeah.
I have friends from Japan that I will see in Hong Kong, or I will see them in Korea, or see them in Taiwan. And of course, the Taiwanese friends, I'll see them in Korea as well, or see Korean friends in Hong Kong, and so forth. Yeah.
Yes. So more questions about his traveling.
Mhm.
So you said you originally started to travel to other places, and then you grew as a dancer because that was the way to meet more advanced dancers and better teachers and things like that.
Mm.
So yeah, how did this evolve over time? Your traveling.
Well, initially I went to festivals because that was what was available, right? So you take classes with the teachers, and then at night you dance with people, and then eventually I started going to marathons where the focus was just to dance, right?
Yeah.
Because I realized that also for classes, well, every teacher and student, the fit is different, right? So sometimes it fits great and you take more classes with the teacher, and other times you realize, okay, the teacher's style doesn't work for your learning style, and then you don't take classes with that teacher anymore. uh, and I guess at a certain point I decided, well, I should really be doing more dancing to get better, rather than adding more pages to my dictionary, so to speak, right? I should know what I should be able to do what I know better, right?
Yeah.
Just rather than to know more, right? Because dancing for me is like when I'm dancing with a partner. In a way, I have a dictionary, so to speak, right? And then depending on the music, I pick a word from the dictionary, and we dance that word, so to speak. Uh, but the thing is, you need to be able to write that word well. It's not just that you know the word exists; you can spell it right. Your handwriting is good, right? So your leading and your technique and so on. So the way to do that is you practice, right? And you can either go to practica or you can go to milonga. And I guess for me, milonga is a better way because it's more fun, right? The practica, yes, you go there and you can work on specific things, right? But then it's work. So I guess I'm lazy. I would rather have fun, more fun. Practica is good in its own way, but I enjoy milonga more. So I'd rather just go and dance more. So I was going to a lot of marathons where it's clear everyone there is just nuts about dancing, right? So everyone's just there to dance. So that was good, and you meet more friends as well. And then eventually, I also started participating in encuentros, which are more of a thing in Europe, right? As you know, they're smaller events, not as big, because marathons sometimes you have 200 or 300 people, and the good thing about marathon is that you can dance with a lot of people. The bad thing is you sometimes cannot find that same person again, even if you enjoy the dance with them, right? The next time even if you can find them, someone else has already invited
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Whereas at an encuentro, it's a smaller event, typically about 100 odd people, maybe 120, and so the pool is smaller. But generally, the level of dancing is still quite high. So your chances of having a good time are good. And if you like dancing with somebody, you have a good chance to be able to find them again and invite them again. Uh, so again, different things for different people. Yeah. And then of course, sometimes the local milongas are a lot of fun, and then I just go to the local milonga.
Yeah.
I was recently in Korea. I went to the Busan Tango Marathon, and then after that, I went back to Seoul for a few days, and I went to the local milongas in Seoul, and I had great fun there as well.
Yes. Yes. So when did you start traveling to Europe for encuentros, for example?
That would probably be around 2017, I think. Yeah, prior to that, I was mostly dancing in Asia, and then I think
Okay.
around 2017, I started going to events in Europe. And Yeah, so that was that. I think that also coincided with my return to snowboarding as a hobby. I am a snowboarder. I learned it in university, and then after that, I stopped for a long time. After graduation in Singapore, of course, there are no mountains, uh, no snow because it's a tropical country. So it was only, I think, in 2017 when I saw my friends posting photos on Facebook of them snowboarding. So I said, no,
That's
I'm
fun.
fed up. I'm going to do it. So I bought a ticket to Japan. When snowboarding is great fun. So I decided to resume snowboarding. So besides Japan, I also went to Europe to try to snowboard, and then I made friends there. So that was another good excuse to go back. So I was going back to Italy, especially, for snowboarding because it's more affordable than Switzerland, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, so I went to Italy, snowboard. I would also dance along the way, and sometimes I would combine them all. So I would go to an encuentro and then go to the mountains, right? So dancing and then snowboarding. Yeah. So that was
Okay.
about 2017 and 2018, 2019. I was doing basically the same thing as well, going to Europe for events and sometimes twice, right? So once in the winter, snowboard and dance, and then in the summer, just dancing. Yeah.
So was there anything different about dancing in Europe than what you were used to?
It's well, I think in Europe, well, it depends again on the event, and what I realized was the choice of music by the DJs is different. Yeah, I think that's one of the big things. And obviously, of course, people are different, right? In Asia, most of the women, the followers are about my size or smaller. And
Mm.
in Europe, it's more common that the follower is taller than me, for example, or heavier than me. So I have to make adjustments. Yeah. But otherwise, oh, and I think age group for some reason, in at least the events I went to, the average age was a little higher. I
Yeah.
think it was common to see people in their 40s and 50s or even older. In Asia, it's a little bit younger. I think 30s to 50s, 30s, 40s are the dominant group. There are some people still in their 50s, whereas in Europe, at least in the events I went to, people tended to be in their 50s or older. Maybe because these people had more time or they were retired, for example. In Asia, generally, it's working people who are dancing. There are not so many retirees, and maybe also because the scene in Asia is not old enough that you have people who, a lot of hardcore dancers who reach 60
Yeah.
or 70 and are still dancing. Right, so
Yeah.
the hardcore dancers now are still in their 40s and 50s. They haven't reached 60 or 70. Whereas in Europe, you probably have a large enough core of people, who have been dancing a long time that, even when they hit 60 or 70, they still want to dance and you still see them in the events.
Yeah, and maybe also there's difference in whether young people dance tango or not, because I think also here, like I've seen a lot of beginners who are already older in
Mm.
classes, and maybe in other countries there's more young people interested in dancing tango. Who knows?
Yeah, I guess it depends on each city, whether there's an avenue for young people to learn to dance, for example, or whether it's welcoming. I mean, sometimes it just makes all the difference if, for example, there's a teacher in the dance department in a university who can teach tango, for example, and is encouraging the students to go out and dance in the local milongas, right? So that the students get off campus, not just dancing among themselves, but get off campus and assimilate or integrate into the local community. So for me, when I was at Stanford, that was a big thing because the club would run a milonga once a quarter, but the rest of the time it was just practice, right? So unless you had some way of getting off campus. So I was lucky because I bought a car my second year at university. And so every weekend I was driving, to a local milonga, right? Sometimes down to Palo Alto, other times up to the city. So every weekend, basically, I was out dancing.
Yes, yes. And so you have experience with Buenos Aires?
Yeah, I went to Buenos Aires, but only once. That was in 2014. At that time, I had a girlfriend from Hong Kong, so she was coming to Singapore. So and I said, well, push back a start date and let's go to Argentina because I don't know when we will have the time again. Because generally, if you go to Argentina, because it's so far away from Singapore, you try to go for a longer period of time. So we went for 1 month. So we had a good time. Yeah, it was nice. We went to Salon Canning, we went to El Beso, for example, Botany Bailarin, Grisel, bunch of other places. Yeah, at that time already, there was an app called Oi Milonga, which
Mm-hmm.
basically tells you, which is kind of a Milonga calendar, right, for the tango dancers. Tells you, who's running a Milonga and where. Yeah, so that's what we did. So we went out dancing pretty much almost every night. Although we did have detours. I mean, we went to Iguazu Falls for a few days. We went to Uruguay for a weekend, which was actually great fun. Yeah, so um, we went to Montevideo. So as tango originated, on both sides of the river, right? Even though it says Argentine tango, but actually it was also in Uruguay. So we had a good time in Montevideo as well. The scene is a lot smaller, but it was nice. People were friendly. We got along well with them. So it was nice. And it was a nice break from Buenos Aires as well. Buenos Aires is pretty, but yeah, Montevideo was a nice change. Yeah.
So what in what sense? It's quieter or
Buenos Aires is a big city, right? And you can tell that at one point it used to be enormously wealthy. You see all these palaces everywhere,
yeah,
right? But the city has fallen on more difficult times. I mean,
yes,
Argentina now is having a difficult economic period, but even back then in 2014, it was not easy. And if you walk through Recoleta, for example, the cemetery, you could see some beautiful graves that had simply not been maintained, which meant
yeah,
that the descendants had either run out of money or simply died out, right? So the graves were falling apart, but you could see that they had been built with a lot of money. So that was a bit of a pity, right? So and the city as a whole kind of mirrors the experience we saw in Recoleta. Whereas Montevideo, it's like a European city, right? It's
uh,
clean, safe, modern, stuff all works. Right.
yeah,
Whereas Buenos Aires, there's some petty crime as well. I remember I was taking out my phone to take a picture, and there was a security guard at a nearby hotel and said, no, 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 keep your phone, right? So clearly there was a problem with snatch thefts, for example.
yes,
Yeah. And then even back then, I think people were warning about, looking out for fake notes, because if you change your money, you might get fake notes back in change. Yeah, things
yeah.
like that. So those are difficulties. I mean, I won't gloss over the difficulties that exist in Argentina. Um, but yeah, it was nice, but you have to be alert. Yeah.
And what was your impression of tango in Buenos Aires?
I would say it was good. I mean, of course, it was nice to see what it was like, in the so-called Mecca, right? I
Yeah,
mean, just like I guess if you dance salsa, you go to Cuba, right? If you dance tango, you go to Buenos Aires, um, and I guess I had no expectations, so I wasn't hoping or expecting anything, so I just showed up and say, okay, this is what it is, um, and yeah, it was nice to finally go to all these places that people had talked about, for example, right? Although I knew, of course, that maybe it's the best days of Buenos Aires, were from before, right? Maybe when before the collapse of the peso, right? Back in I think 2002 or earlier, the peso and
yeah,
dollar were pegged at 1 to 1. And at that point, I think um, there were many more people who could afford to dance, right? And then by the time we were there, the peso was 14 pesos to the dollar. I think it's more than 100 now, I think. So it's been really, really tough. But even back then, it was 14 pesos to the dollar, and already it was expensive for the average person to go dancing, right? So like what I talked about earlier, right? Southeast Asia, it's expensive for them to do tango because of shoes and classes. And I guess in Buenos Aires today, even back then, right? A lot of people in the middle class, it was getting expensive for them to dance tango. And today, if you go to Buenos Aires, I'm not sure, apart from tourists and teachers, who else is dancing tango, because daily life has become difficult. Yeah.
okay,
So back then it was nice to walk in the Obeso, see the iconic pillar, the floor, the door, go to Salon Canning, right? So there's a famous mural on one of the walls of Salon Canning, right, where you can see it's a collage, all the famous people in that collage, many of whom have since passed away.
yeah,
But it was nice to go to these famous places. Yeah, and of course, besides Salon Canning and El Beso, we went to Chacarita, for example, where so many of the personalities are buried, right? So to see the uh, uh, graves, right, of Osvaldo Pugliese, Carlos Di Sali, uh, the, Carlos Gardel, for example, right? So just I guess soaking up the history of
yeah,
tango history, beyond just the dance and beyond the music. Of course, I mean, music is a big part of it. So, D'Arienzo, Canaro, all these guys, buried in the cemeteries. Um, just it was nice. I remember we had a picnic beside the statue of Pugliese and Di Sali, where they were in Chacarita. Yeah.
nice. So a different question. So what does tango mean to your life? Like what do you like about it? What especially nowadays? What role does it play?
Mm. Well, I guess things have changed a little bit for me. When I started, tango was a big part of my life, because I really enjoyed it. So it was a great hobby. And also for me, it was, I guess, how I made a lot of friends, because I'm an introvert by nature, so I don't make friends that quickly, so or easily. So I've got some old friends from elementary school days. I've known them more than 30 years, and then just a handful of friends I've made along the way from work, for example.
Yes.
And then probably 80 or 90% of my friends today have come from tango in some way, and of course, because I'm mostly dancing with women, most of my tango friends are women. So I guess most of my friends today are women because women from tango. So that definitely had impact on my life. When I traveled, I would after I would try to find, of course, a milonga in the city I was in. And then if I meet someone I got along well with, then we'll become friends on Facebook or whatever it was. And the next time I was in town, we have dinner, coffee, and some of these friends became quite good friends. Yeah, and to the extent that even some of them have stopped dancing tango. If I'm in town, we still meet up, have a lunch or coffee, and it's good. So it was a way for me, I guess, to socialize. Yeah, and my past girlfriends were also tango dancers. So that was basically how I tried to find love. And today it's a little bit different because my current girlfriend does not dance tango.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So because of COVID, right? Because COVID, all the tango stopped, so I had to develop new hobbies.
Yes.
And then I decided to try online dating. I met her, and we did the non-tango hobbies, right? And we enjoyed them. So now that life is going back to normal, and the milongas have restarted, I go back to dance as well, but not as much as before because I now spend time with my girlfriend who does not dance.
So she
Yeah.
doesn't want to
So
learn?
well, I brought her to a milonga in Rotterdam, and she watched for a while and said, "Doesn't seem that interesting." So um, for now, it's a no. Yeah, yeah. So for now, it's she accepts that I love dancing and that I go out dancing occasionally. Yeah, but of course, it now comes out of my personal time rather than couple time, for example. Yeah.
Yes, sure. But when you travel to other countries for tango, isn't that awkward? Or does she go with you? Or
Well, for our recent trip, well, we were in the US. Well, I guess earlier this year, she had some work in Europe, so I tagged along,
Hmm.
and I only went dancing. Well, I went dancing during the days when she was busy with work and had work dinners, so that was fine. And then in June, I went to the Busan Tango Marathon. That was about a week. And since it was mostly just dancing, it didn't make sense for her to come along. So I just went by myself. Yeah. Yeah. So generally, I think we try to travel together because, we enjoy each other's company. And if there's going to be a lot of dancing, then probably it's better to have a separate trip. Yeah. But if it's 1 or 2 nights during the whole trip, then maybe it's okay. So like this trip in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City, I was the DJ for one of the milongas. So for 2 nights, I went dancing, but the rest of the time I was with her. So I didn't take any of the workshops with the visiting teacher.
Hmm.
Uh, I spent my time with my girlfriend. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how we've managed to balance it.
Yeah, that's also important, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you have gone through 2 years of not being really able to dance, you have to start finding other things, and then you also discover that there's other things to do in life, I
Mhm.
guess. Because some people are really so obsessed with tango is that all they do is dance tango. Um, but that's yeah, it's an addictive substance, so to say. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a drug, and I've been on that drug for more than 20 years, right? So I think if COVID had not happened, I would just have continued doing what I did, which was travel everywhere and just dance and occasionally snowboard. That was my life.
yes, yes. So do you miss it now? Like, do you crave for tango when you have less time? When you spend less time on tango, or is it doesn't it really work like that?
Well, when I'm dancing, I really enjoy it. But when I'm not dancing, I guess I'd have other things to do, so I don't miss it so much. Because even when I was dancing a lot, I had other things, right? I was working, right? I was also doing some sightseeing. So if I'm sightseeing, if I'm at the top of the Eiffel Tower looking down, I don't think to myself, oh, I wish I was dancing a bit longer here.
Mm.
That's a different thing, right? So if it's a day, especially if it's a daytime, right? And if it's a nighttime, yeah, I'll usually try to find tango. But if there's no tango, I'll do other stuff. I remember I was in Helsinki some years ago and I couldn't find any tango, so I just went to watch a movie and that was fine.
Yes. Okay. Typical introvert hobby, right?
I
Yeah,
guess. Yeah.
we always find ways to spend our time, even if it's alone. So
Mhm,
that's just the way it is. Um, so let's talk a bit more about DJing, because you
mhm,
said it's not your main focus.
mhm.
But can you tell something about like your some of your views about DJing, or tell me some like interesting anecdotes about times when you DJed, or maybe recently what happened in Vietnam, anything that you'd like to say?
Mhm. Well, I think um, what I'll say is not anything special, right? Because the DJ's primary job is to get people onto the dance floor, right?
Yeah.
And it's a responsibility that other people have entrusted you with, right? So don't take it lightly. And I guess there's some debate, about whether or not the DJ's job is also to widen the musical horizons of the dancers, right? To introduce them to new stuff beyond just the big four orchestras. Should you play other stuff? Should you play, stuff by the big four that's not so commonly heard, and so on and so forth. And maybe, I think practica is a better way to, play stuff that's more experimental. And in the milonga, your job is to fill the floor. So I try as much as I can to fill the floor. And I think for better or worse, my taste is quite generic in the sense that if I like something, there's high odds that most people will like it as well.
Hmm.
At least that's been my experience, that when I play stuff, generally people do get under the floor and dance. I think that's the job of any DJ, right? So the DJ's job is not to get compliments, right? It's that enough people dance that they are happy and they don't walk off the dance floor, because at an event or at a local milonga, right? Everyone's trying to cover their costs, right? So your job is to help the organizer survive, right? Because if you play music that you love and nobody does, they leave, they don't come back, the milonga closes, and that's bad, right? So, and the thing is, if your music's fantastic, people don't give the milonga organizer more money, right? Yeah, it's very rare for people to tip the DJ or to tip the milonga
Yeah.
organizer, right? So you have to play music that's good enough that people will show up and pay money, right? You don't play music that's that's polarizing, that like when 80% thing is no good and 20% thing is so good, they'll give you double the money. Tango doesn't work that way, right? Maybe in some other industries, you can survive on 20% of the people giving you a huge tip, right? But in Tango, it's not that way. It's usually a fixed price. So in that case, you need to play music that nobody objects to, right? And some people like, right? Yeah. So I think luckily for me in that sense, as a DJ, generally people agree with the music. They may not think that it's fantastic, but it's rare that like they say, okay, they don't like this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So I
what?
guess I'm a
Yes.
generic DJ in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that's decent, right? Because then you understand what your responsibility is.
Yeah. And I think every DJ has to find their own style. So some DJs specialize in obscure music. For example, I remember in an encuentro in Italy, there was this tanda that really nice to dance to, but very unusual. I didn't recognize any of the songs, and I asked the DJ after that, and it turned out that all four songs were from separate orchestras, and they were all obscure orchestras. So somehow this DJ had managed to put together a tanda which worked, but there were actually four different orchestras, yeah, that nobody had heard of. So it's kind of those one-hit wonder orchestras with one or two good songs, and then you have to somehow, not just pair them, right? But you have to match them with three other songs that works, and that's really hard. And I mean, I salute the people who have time to do that. And I guess if you are a full-time DJ, maybe it's possible. But I think most of us are only enthusiastic amateurs, at least in Asia. I think in Europe there are some full-time DJs, but in Asia generally we are just enthusiastic amateurs, which means we have day jobs that pay the bills, right? And so the amount of time we can spend on Tango just trying to build tandas is more limited. Yeah, and of course the question is the return on your time, right? Because you might spend 5 or 6 hours trying to build a few tandas of these obscure orchestras, and when are you going to use them? Almost never. That's the
Yeah.
problem, right? It's
Yeah.
the same thing with like learning to use the Q and the Z, in English, right? In other languages, you have similar situations, the special letters, the special characters, that really might be the right one for the right job, but only 2 or 3% of the time you use it, right?
Yeah.
And as a dancer or as a DJ, right, you need to have that 80% really, really good, and the last 5%, if you don't have it, it's not critical, right? Yeah.
Yes. Uh, Have you ever DJed on other continents?
Uh,
Yeah,
not in Europe.
continents is kind of strange because Asia, Southeast Asia is almost like a continent on its own.
Yeah.
But
I've DJed in Korea, I've DJed in Hong Kong,
hmm,
I've DJed in Taiwan, uh, in I've
Vietnam,
DJed in China. Yeah, but of course China is a big country, so it depends
yeah,
on the city. I think it was somewhere in Shanghai. It was a local milonga, if you remember, that DJed. Yeah, and then Hong Kong, of course, and then in Taiwan, I don't think it was Taipei, but I definitely DJed in Taichung. Yeah, and then in Korea, I DJed in Seoul before. Yeah, and in Vietnam, I've DJed in Ho Chi Minh, of course. I've DJed in Kuala Lumpur, um, and let's see. No, I don't think I've DJed in the US or in Europe. Yeah,
okay,
mostly because when I go there, I'm on holiday. So if
yes,
I go to Milonga, I just want to dance, So,
yeah,
oh no, I have DJed in the US once in North Carolina.
hmm,
I can't remember the city now. I think it was Raleigh, if I remember correctly. There was a local Milonga or Practica. Yeah. And I think one of my friends who lives there asked me if I wanted a DJ. So I did. And I think it went well. Yeah. Apparently there was a local dancer who was notorious for complaining about music. And apparently it was the first time he actually said he liked the music. So I think I did a
oh,
good
oh, that's
job.
good, yeah, 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 that's funny. Okay, but it's like they invited this it's like this overqualified persons for practica, so um it's I guess it's gonna be good then. Like practicas are usually like I feel like they just put on some music that's
Right.
but it's not like a real DJ like that's
Yeah.
usually for
Yeah. Yeah.
milongas. But I guess you
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, DJ. I mean, for practical, I guess sometimes it's the testing ground for new DJs, right? Where I guess the cost is lower because people can come up and say, okay, let's change the music to something else.
yeah.
It's practical is more informal. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So what do you like? How do you what do you enjoy nowadays about tango? So uh, you told me like you dance less and you spend time on other things, but if you dance tango, like what's the real pleasure of doing so?
Well, I think it's not just the dance itself, but dancing with friends. Yeah.
Mm,
If I dance with a random stranger and it's a great dance, that's great. But then I might never see her again, right? I guess that's why you have Facebook or Line, WeChat, whatever, right? And then the next time you dance again and hopefully you become friends. So I think right now for me, if I go somewhere, it's not about dancing with some stranger who's a good dancer, right? It's dancing with people who are my friends who I enjoy dancing with, right? They might not be the best dancers, but because I know them and I like them, I enjoy dancing with them. Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it for me now. So it's more social now, whereas in the
mm,
past, sometimes it was just about the dance, right? And then I would be dancing every tanda in the milonga unless the music was absolutely awful. Otherwise, I would just dance every tanda.
yeah,
So typical night for me would be 20 tandas or more, right? And now it's less, because I guess I have other things in my life that make me happy as well. And so
yeah,
I don't depend on the milonga to make me happy. So I go there and I dance some, maybe not everything, but I'm happy. So I guess I'm more picky now, right? Because I don't depend on the milonga for happiness.
yes,
Whereas in the past, I think there was a bit more of that.
yeah. There's always a risk in tango of having this monopoly of happiness in one thing, and that's tango can also be a tough hobby, right? Like if you're not having fun, then it's more painful if that's all you rely on for enjoying yourself.
That's true. That's true.
It's a bit of
Yeah.
a tough environment in some ways. Like yeah, there I feel like sometimes you need a lot of factors to be right, especially as you're more advanced. You need a lot of factors to be right to really enjoy yourself. And well,
Hmm.
for some people it's easier than for others, but I guess that's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
It's also about expectations, I guess, right?
yeah,
Because if you go to a, you know, an event, then maybe you feel like, oh, you don't get your money's worth if you're sitting out half the dances, right? And so you just want to keep dancing and get your money's worth, but then of course you get tired and you might not get the dancers that you want, right? You end up with who's left, right? Because at a big event, in the first 30 seconds, if you don't find somebody, the floor's full, and then you have to look around and see who's left, who wants to dance with you, and sometimes it can be pressurizing. If you go to a local milonga, um, you know, it's a bit easier because there's less pressure. You can look around and the regulars were there, right? They say, okay, I've danced with my regulars tonight, or tonight's or there's a stranger in town. Maybe we can dance with him or her and see if that's interesting or not. So they're more curious, right? Whereas at a big event, everyone's a stranger, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
So a different question. Like maybe like how do you imagine your future in tango? Because now it's kind of you're more balanced.
Mhm.
It's always hard to talk about the future, but do you see anything changing about the current status quo in your life, so to say?
I think
Or maybe
yeah, give
just a suggestive question to add to that, like are there any like ambitions or dreams you still have for the future in tango?
Well, I guess, earlier on I had, hopes of or dreams of going to Buenos Aires. And since I've been there, done that, uh, I don't really have anything else in that sense, because, I don't have any ambition to turn professional, whether as a teacher or DJ or anything like that. So I'm happy being an enthusiastic amateur. And I guess I would like to continue dancing for as long as it's fun for me.
Yeah.
And so far it's still good. Yeah. So I'll just enjoy it as much as I can. I think I will dance less than before, simply because, as I said, I have a partner now who doesn't dance.
Mhm.
If I can get her to, take classes and enjoy dancing, then maybe we will dance together someday. But for now, I've accepted that tango will be something I do, without her. And that means necessarily it will be less of my time. So I will want to enjoy that time, make it count, so to speak, right? And that's not the same as dancing more, right? I can
Yeah.
go to the milonga, but that doesn't mean I will be there the first tanda and leave at the last tanda. I will dance and get my tango fix, I guess,
Yeah.
and then I'm happy to go home. So um, I think that looks like the future for now for me. That
Yeah.
I go dancing, occasionally, and I will travel for tango occasionally, less than before, but just with emphasis on reconnecting with old tango friends rather than meeting strangers, because I don't depend in anymore only on tango for happiness.
Yes. Yeah. But is there like that? Do you still have some ambitions about like learning more, and specifically like in lessons or in private lessons, or are you just happy socially dancing socially the
Okay.
way you do so far?
Right. Well, for me, I think there's two things. One is vocabulary,
Hmm.
and that kind of stuff is more difficult for me because I'm not good at remembering sequences. So I enjoy seeing what's possible, but very often I recognize that, it's so difficult to do without a lot of practice. Um, so if I'm not able to spend the time needed to learn that move properly, then it's better not to try it at all, right? If
Yeah.
I because in tango, if you do something poorly, it's dangerous, right? You could hurt yourself or you could hurt your partner.
Yeah.
So in a milonga, so you go to practice, right, to get good at that move. And then in the milonga, sometimes you want to use it, sometimes you don't. So if I see something and I recognize that it's going to take a lot of time in practice to master it, and then if I'm going to use it only 2 or 3% of the time, then I'll skip it because I won't be able to get good enough at it that I could use it confidently in a milonga. So I'm not so interested in vocabulary expansion these days, but what I'm interested in is musical interpretation. So recently I took a series of workshops online with Horacio Godoy,
Ah,
and he has a very deep understanding of the music. So for me, it was absolutely fascinating the way he dissected the music to explain the structure of the music and explain where you had chances to interpret the music or give your partner a chance to interpret the music, right? And not just dancing on the different instruments, but dancing on the different phrases, right? And similarly, I had a class some years ago with Daniel Nacucho, who was a concert pianist before he became a tango teacher, right? So of course, his understanding of music was, very, very good, next level. Again, he was able to lay it out very clearly, when you can switch what you're doing in the music, or what would change what you're doing in the dance to suit the changes in the music. So I think for me, these two teachers were instrumental in changing the way I interpreted the music. And of course, before this, I watched Godoy perform in Hong Kong. I think more than 10 years ago. Again, seeing him dance changed the way I danced, because I didn't realize you could dance to music that way, right? So it was huge, huge impact for me. I guess only a couple of minutes, but it changed the rest of my life. Yeah, at least the rest of my tango life. So for me, that's the real fun of it, not just dancing with a partner, right? But finding a way to entertain yourself and your partner, right? So that at the end of it, it's not just a nice dance, but you get a big hug, right? Big smile, and she says, "Oh, that was great." And for me, that's like the best thing I can do in tango. Right?
Yeah, I also guess you just keep improving just by dancing with all these different ladies, especially if they
That,
have a
yeah,
high level. Then just
right.
the fact of dancing with them already gives you new like perspectives, even if it's
Yeah.
subconsciously. Like every
Mm,
person is different.
yes, yes.
Yeah, so we as leaders we have the problem, of course, that we always dance with ourselves, whereas the ladies or the followers, they dance with a different system every time, because these leaders are more different usually than the followers are different. But still, we
Mm,
have so many options to dance with so many different ladies that have their own character and personality, and their own way of
yes, yeah,
moving, and their own
yeah.
background. And so I think you pick up things. And that's what I notice in an encuentro. I just pick up stuff. I even pick up just steps simply because of the person I dance with. It's a really
Mhm.
strange thing, right? Yeah, it's hard to
Yeah,
actually. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
no, no, it's okay. No, I was just going to say that we all have our own habits, and when we dance with someone different, right, then we have that chance to break those habits, right? Because that person also has habits. So when you dance with your favorite partners, you both develop habits that fit with each other. And when you dance with someone new, you realize that, okay, those habits don't work anymore because you're always doing A, B, C, and then she no longer
Mm.
responds with D, E, F. She's doing something else, right? So that's part of the fun, because then you exercise the other parts of your dictionary that you don't usually use. And one interesting topic I was seeing on Facebook, one of these tango groups that mentioned, how you can expand your vocabulary is by deleting things that you usually do. And so, for example, where it's a cross or a turn to the left or turn to the right or something else, if you consciously try not to do that, then you have to do something else in your dancing, right? Which changes, the vocabulary you use. And that could be an interesting way. And then you might realize that because of circumstances, you're forced to construct something new, and maybe that works. And then you've added something new to your repertoire.
I have one last question for you. um, Especially based on everything we just discussed in the last 10 minutes. Like, what makes a really good dancer? When you go to some of these events you talk about, like what makes a really good dancer for you?
Oh, that's well, I guess I can break it down into the four things, right? That I think for at least for a leader, right? For a leader, you're juggling four balls, right? You have to control your body, you have to lead your partner, you have to watch for traffic, and you have to listen to music, right? So a good dancer has to do all four of these things, right? That means if you control your body, that means your own technique is good, right? You have to lead your partner. That means you have to be very clear about what you would like your partner to do, right? Watch for traffic, right? You have to be aware of your surroundings. Don't bump into people. Don't let people bump into you, right? And listen to the music, right? So if the music is, suggesting something, maybe go along with it. And if you want to do something different, make sure that your partner understands why it's going to be different. Because, you know, difference, being different for its own sake doesn't have any meaning, right? Because if it's different, good, that's great. But if it's different, bad, that's really bad. So good dancer, I think the only person who can decide whether you're a good dancer or not is your partner, right? At the
Mm.
end of the day, if your partner, didn't bump into anybody, and she felt that you interpreted the music well, and she understood what you were always trying to say, right? Then for her, you were a good dancer.
Yes.
Yeah, and likewise for the men, right? Do you decide if your partner was good or not? Well, did she understand what you wanted to say? Did she respond the way you wanted, right? Uh, and then she didn't kick anybody and nobody kicked her, right? Then that was a good dance. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for today, for all your insights and your perhaps also your different cultural perspective, considering you're from Singapore and I didn't really know anything about tango in Southeast Asia. So I also want to thank Mabel Gomez for connecting us, because she suggested you as a good candidate for my interviews, and that was the right decision because I really enjoyed this, and I definitely hope to meet you one day, because well, you're very talkative for an introvert, so I guess that's really nice if you can talk so much about these topics that really matter in tango, right? I really like that when I meet people who really capture the essence of some of the things that are important. And yeah, so thank you for the interview, and
Yeah,
hope to meet you one day on one of your many travels. Who
sure.
knows?
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, see you. Bye bye.